Welcome to the Explosive Strength Podcast with Jared Bennett. Today's episode, I have Daniel Blair here with me. Daniel's been training with me since middle school, worked his way through high school, all the way through college. Now he's a pitcher for the Giants organization. And Daniel came to the gym the other day. He's been watching my podcast and he had some questions. And he asked me one question. I said, no, let's just wait and save it for a podcast because a lot of other people out there that listen to me will have some of the similar questions. And sometimes I overcomplicate things, I may say, but Daniel's going to go through and ask as a normal person that's not in the training world, but has been trained. So anyway, so he's jotted down some notes, watched several podcasts. We'll reference the podcast, which it came from, if you want to go back and look at it. So anyway, here we go with Daniel Blair. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Jared. Good to be here. So first off, I think I came to you asking about maybe what podcast I should watch, and you were kind of like, I'm not totally sure, but kind of hit some ones that looked interesting to me and just took notes along the way. But first, I started with the Why We Box Squat podcast, and a lot of good stuff in that. I think the big thing, you start off talking about how box squat has a correlation with sprint speed, and it's the process of the box squatting. You're able to break up the eccentric and the concentric aspect of the squat. Mm-hmm. So what is it about breaking it up that you think is enhancing the sprint speed? Because obviously when you're sprinting, you're not pausing and stopping, but it's showing you more of a direct correlation to sprints with that splitting of the eccentric and concentric.
When you break up the eccentric-concentric chain, so the lowering is eccentric and the raising is concentric. And the reversal action is usually more elastic when you do not box squat. Mm-hmm. So you're going to stand up with more, you're going to squat down and stand up, you'll stand up with more elastic energy. So like if you take 315 on a box or box squat, you can squat 315 faster than you can box squat it. So if you box squat 315 at 0.8, if you regular squat 315 at 0.8, you may only be able to regular squat 295 at a 5.3. And so, but sometimes people can actually box squat more than they can regular squat. Some people box squat, regular squat the same, like my nephew Zach. He box squats all the way up till he feels ready to max, then he will max regular squat, and he'll max. Every time he's done 500 in the gym, he's never even touched 500 on the box squat. He'd work up to like a 455 for a set of three, feel like we're max, then we'll go max, and he'll hit, I think he hit 515. Same thing with Alex Yeverton back in the day. Remember Alex?
Yep.
We would box squat all the way up to a meet. And the thing about the powerlifters and people like that nowadays is they think they have to do powerlifting all the time. They think they have to lift with the kilo weights. They think they have to squat with their singlets on. Like if you look at the people next door at the 24-hour gym, you got some powerlifters over there, and they will belt, singlet, knee sleeve. I mean, they are wrapped up. And we've done powerlifting meets with us. Yep. And we never did any of that. We don't squat with a belt.
No, not training at least. Maybe at the meets, but
yeah, because at the meets we're just trying to break those records and get them as high as we can, so that no one comes in and breaks what we've done.
Right.
So,
I guess to continue on that, you talked about box squatting in order to push the regular squat. I think watching a lot of the West Side stuff, obviously Louis pushed them. They box squat, they box squat, they box squat. In regular meet, they're not box squatting. So how did you take that idea from Louis? For Zach example, did he just figure out like, hey, I can box squat all the way up to the point that I'm in a regular squat? What is it about box squatting? Because you use box squatting mostly for sprint speed stuff.
Yep.
So one question I wrote was, if someone wasn't concerned with their sprint speed and they're just wanting to push their regular squat up, why are you putting on a box squat? Why is Zach, who's not worried about his 40 time, but knows it's going to correlate with his free squat?
No, he wants to run into fours.
Okay.
So he does, but I think he's got a box squat because he wants to sprint faster.
Okay.
But I think he also likes the aspect of regular squatting because most schools regular squat.
Right.
And so when he goes to high school, he's trying to regular squat 600 in high school at EC.
Right.
And so I think over time, because he's been there for 8+ years, mm-hmm. and I think over time he's learned himself where he's at more than I know himself. I know how to still progress his strength that he don't kind of know, but he knows once he gets to a certain level where it's going to be at.
Right.
And with the box squat, like with learning from Lou, the box squat is a method of squatting. It's the box is a tool that helps us break up that eccentric concentric chain because it causes more neuromuscular drive. And so you're actually, with the box squat's a method, so it's a static dynamic method.
Yep.
Sit. Although with the regular squat, you got that elastic energy that's stored, you still have somewhat stored energy after you pause for a second or so on the box, but it breaks up that eccentric concentric chain just enough to where you'll have a direct correlation to the sprint if you're squatting a certain weight at a certain ratio. And if you're not squatting in that ratio, squatting then is not the answer for the athletes to squat. So even like with Lasky back in the day, we never did Brooks Hardy. We just was getting tendos with Brooks.
Right.
Lasky is one that really helped me start figuring that out. That was about 2015-ish. And so we're almost 9 years into.
Yeah.
And so I do have the books for trying to, that teaches, I can't even think of what I'm trying to, velocity-based training, but I never read them because I think sometimes what we're getting to now with these universities they're trying to get these kids to hit 0.7s and 0.8s at the university. What'd y'all do at Texas? Did y'all use VBT?
We used the camera-based system, but our workout said hit as much weight as you can in this range, but deferring from you, and I think even, obviously I do some stuff with the tread. I think other people, when they think of speed work, I remember at Texas, it was always at least a 0.8, sometimes even like you want to move the bar at a 1 or above, and I'm thinking, well, this is really fast, which I loved it because it's an off day almost. It's easy because they're so fast, but knowing from you talking about how you use 0.6 and that's more of a correlation, I guess, how did you find that 0.6 was that sweet spot compared to moving lighter stuff at a higher velocity?
Well, knowing that if the bar moves too fast, you don't create enough tension on the tissue. And so what I'm seeing now is like even kids like at the University of Georgia and whatnot with the wheel, is that they're so concerned about moving at 0.7 or 0.8, whatever the university standard is for that institution, is that the bar is moving too fast to create tension. It's almost like power clean. You don't get stronger with power clean because the bar's velocity is too high.
Right.
You have to, that's why like with a 0.6, and I was able to talk to Louis about this before he passed away, because I went to West Side September, then he passed away in March. I'll do another episode on West Side later. Is that I was showing Lou all my jump results. I was showing him pictures of how high people were jumping and how we use dumbbell jumps to increase the jump height. When if we increase the jump height, we also increase the sprint speed. So I was showing him my ratios on if you squat 1.7 times your body weight, you should run a 4.7. And I was trying to tell Lou and show Lou all this stuff. And I said, you got to squat at 0.6 meters.
Right.
He goes, no, 8. I said, no. I said, Lou, 8 moves too fast. If you move in at 8 meters per second, the bar's moving too fast to create tension, so you're not going to get the adaptation that you're actually looking for. He goes, yeah, that's why we increase our percentages. So basically, Lou said they actually did slow the bar down. They were not squatting at 0.8, but I think he said 0.8 for so long that he kind of stuck with it. But then later on, because they started squatting 5 sets to 5 later at Westside, I said, because they went from 8 sets to 2 or 10 sets to 2, whatever their speed squats were. And I said, Lou, why did you start doing 5 sets to 5 on your dynamic effort day? And he says, because people don't try as hard. So now we were getting into people where they were not giving as much effort as the older generation, like you watch the movie West Side versus the World, where those guys are trying to kill each other to get from point A to point B.
Right.
As the generations go on, they've gotten a little bit more soft, so he has to change what he's doing. And so I think he appreciated me telling him about 0.6 to get to those ratios. And that was just, for me to get to that 0.6 was just an accident. I have no idea how I arrived at that, but we don't always squat in the 0.6 range.
No,
your first rep may be at a 5.3.
Right.
Some people's are 4.7, but the 0.6 is just a testing barometer, and it's not a lot of people hear that 0.6 and think we're staying in the sixes. You may get, if you got 5 reps, you may only get 1.6, and the rest are downhill from there.
Right.
And so because by that 5th rep, if we're doing brief maximum tension, that last rep can be a 0.28. And so you have to have those first 3 reps in a way to fatigue you so that you're giving maximum effort for those last 2.
Right.
Or if you're doing a set of 3, your first 2 may be smooth, and you may make or you may miss that 3rd rep because now you're causing maximum neural drive. So you're getting the optimal discharge frequency once you're under that stress load. And once you pass that 5 and more, I don't know if I've got super training here with me, and I don't have it marked on a page, but a lot of this book, has, I won't find this because I didn't mark it, but just gonna try to see what we got. But a lot of times I was doing stuff and I read it later in the book. So it ain't like I read the book then go, oh, here.
Right.
It's kind of like I thought I was coming up with something, but as old as this book is, I can't find it. It says anything greater than 6 reps hinders strength development.
Okay.
And so it came from that book, but that let me know. But I read that later after training Brooks. And so when I was training Brooks, we went from a 255 front squat to a 365 front squat in 8 weeks. And that's when I realized, that's the first time I realized when he increased his strength that quick, he went from running a 5.140 to a 4.840 yard dash. And so he did that with front squats. So you can improve with the front squats, but most people are not willing to abuse their body holding that weight up in the front half with the front squats. So being that even people like Johnny, as short as he is, with the box squat, his 40-yard dash improves on a monthly basis, as short as he is, and as tall as you are, your 40-yard dash was improving. So there's some why can a short person, like Mariah, she can squat. I've not tested Emily, but like she's only 5'2",
right?
And she's still squatting down to that 12-inch box where you got someone that's a 6'2" male. She's improving, he's improving, but for some reason, if you take that 6-foot male and you increase that box height to 13 or 14 inches, their running speed, like you probably heard in one of those podcasts, like Baggett's sprint speed actually went from a 4.8 to a 4.9. It was actually going back in the opposite direction.
Right.
So I do not understand why that happens, and it's happened to several people. Even Malachi had a regress in his sprint speed when the box height went up, and when I dropped the box back down, we got better. But sometimes people want to squat more weight, but squatting more weight's not necessary if it's not producing that desired result.
Right.
So what's the point in squatting 600 if you're not sprinting fast, especially for what I'm trying to do for these athletes?
Right.
If you're a power, but if he's squatting off a higher box, that higher box may not transfer like it does to Zach's,
right?
Because the box is higher, so he's not getting the depth. So if you're trying to squat in powerlifting competition, you still got to hit depth. So what's the point in having 600 pounds on your back if it's not going to transfer to lifting knee,
right?
Or if it's not going to transfer to sprint speed or jump height,
right? And I think a lot of people who are maybe seeing box squats and prescribing them are starting to use just a bench to sit on. And so if that's not the right height, do you think that, obviously for you and your gym, you've discovered that 12 inches is a really good spot for you. The bench, one, doesn't have that 6-inch foam pad.
Yep.
So it doesn't have the soft aspect of it. The height, I'm going to assume, is not 12 inches off the ground. Do you think that they're reaping any benefit off that, or they'd be better off just sticking with the free squat?
I think they'd probably be better off sticking to just regular squat. I did have one person this past year, he did regular squat, and his sprint speed got faster. And sometimes that may be 1 out of 10 kids that happens for. But if someone came to me and they had to go 3 months guaranteed to get faster, I'm going to give them box squat all the time.
Yep.
Because now that kid may get better regular squatting, but then I wasted 1 month if he did not.
Right.
And so sometimes the regular squat does help, and sometimes it don't. But usually the box squat is almost guaranteed to help all the time.
Right.
Where you're rolling the dice and taking a chance on that particular athlete, whether they're going to get faster or not.
So I know we've also talked about, you've seen similar benefits doing a pause squat. Just oftentimes people don't have the discipline to pause long enough at the bottom. If they're missing reps, they're more worried about missing reps. They're not going to pause at the bottom. Is there a specific height? Because obviously we teach more so, you talk about the hip fold getting down below the knees because that's the international lifting. But would squatting down to more of that 12-inch range and pausing there possibly reap better benefits, or you just going to always teach that hamstring to calf even on the pause squat to try and increase that sprint speed?
Hamstring to calf always, because the lower you squat, the more the more glute recruitment you get.
Right.
So, and if you pause parallel or higher, you got more shearing forces on the ACL instead of compression forces. So, like when we run, we jump, and we're active in sport, like when you pitch and you land on your left leg, that knee's got some type of compression going on. And it's better if we can get those compression forces instead of those shearing forces. With the shearing forces, one bone's trying to go one direction, the other one's trying to go other direction, so you put a lot more stress on the ACL by squatting higher. And if you stress your ACL and you apply and play in sport, but because you want squatting load, you create more stress on the ACL, you could have a likelihood of injuring the ACL more.
Right. So then for people like Mariah, Emily, or Johnny, maybe some shorter people, do you think, obviously there's no boxes lower than, it's 11 and a half inches now.
Yeah,
is them doing that hamstring to calf at a pause squat, have you ever seen, like, maybe they'll take more sprint benefit, but same thing to your argument, the pausing is the issue with that. If you had the athlete who's that short and is going to take that pausing very seriously, do you think they're going to have the same benefits, possibly more, or just not totally sure until you try it?
Not sure until we try it on everybody, because I am the only one that I know of that's, like, I did pause squat all the time. My vertical, I got to a 37-inch vertical at 233 pounds, and I started getting injuries as I was getting older, and it limited me to getting to that 40. But I was very disciplined. I'd rather miss a rep because I paused,
right,
than to go down and stand up with it, not knowing that I did not do the right thing.
Right.
And so, and I've tried to give other people pause squat, but all of a sudden they're not pausing. And I'm like, it's just best if we just go back to the box. The pause, whether it's a box or if you're disciplined enough to pause, we're still utilizing the static dynamic method, which increases absolute strength and rate of force development at the same time.
Right. So when you say box squat correlates to that sprint speed, you could almost change that and just say using that static dynamic method is what really is correlating to that sprint speed more than the box. The box is just the tool you were using to accomplish that static dynamic.
Because I can get more people to adhere to it.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's the reason for the box. You get more people to adhere to those
right
rules. And I've got a kid now, I've got a kid in Oregon and I got a kid in California. They're both improving sprint speed during football season. That's pretty sick. I've never really seen, well, I don't have a whole lot of kids come in during football season anyway, but for these two that's doing the remote training with me, they're still getting jumping higher and they're sprinting faster in season. I told their dad, I mean, that's not average.
Right.
When you're supposed to see a slowdown right now in seasons when you're not supposed to see a change, but they're actually still changing.
Right.
So,
so then we talked about the difference possibly between the pause and the box. We talked about a little bit of the 12-inch box, the success. Obviously, there are your outliers, like we talked about Terrence the other day. We talk about Maddox using, they're 6'7", 6'8" tall,
yeah, so
moving the box up a little bit because you've seen not the benefits you want of the 12-inch box. So there is some room, but that's where you talk about you've got to try and then change and try, but that's where testing every month becomes so important.
Yeah, because if you're testing on a monthly basis, you know that, okay, you said like Maddox right now at the gym, he's 6'8". He's going to go play football at Furman. He squats, he's got a 12-inch box because all the boxes at the gym you see are taped.
Right.
So you can't adjust the height of the boxes. So what I do, I have a red pad that I got from Elite FTS, which is about 2 inches. And then I put that pad down, then I put that blue pad on top of that red pad. So he's now actually squatting down to a 14-inch box.
Right.
With the blue pad.
Right.
And he's 6'8".
So you explain the importance in the blue pad. Why is it a safety thing? Is it something about the compression and then coming off of it is important? Is there something, or just because you've seen someone do it? Where'd you take that from?
I got that, I think years ago, because I just started off with the blue pad. I don't even know why I bought the blue pad. I think I got it because it was because Lou at Westside always squatted. They didn't have a pad. They actually squatted on real foam.
Oh, wow.
So imagine me squatting, you squatting, and someone else squatting in the gym when it's 100 degrees inside the gym.
Yeah.
And we're all sweating. So now you're sitting down into a sweat-soaked sponge because Westside was not aired out either.
Right.
And so I got the blue pad years ago because it represented what they had. But you're not sitting into a sweat-soaked sponge.
Right.
And so I bought the blue pad. And I just started using it for the box squat. And later on, I came to find out, or Louis told me, he said, it's just like sitting on a couch. A couch cushion's softer, so it's harder to get off the couch than it is like a hard kitchen chair.
Right.
And so if you try to stand up and you're sitting on your couch and don't use your arms to stand up, it's a little bit tougher. You got to give a little bit more oomph to get out that. So
Right.
the deal with that is the soft pad creates more leg drive. So you have to have more leg drive to get off the soft pad versus the hard pad.
Right. Makes sense.
Because of that sinking effect.
So then we talk about changing a squat stimulus at time. Obviously, the safety squat bar is popular at your gym. I know sometimes you talk about, I just need to change the stimulus. Maybe you've pushed the box squat regular for so long, so you change it. You have people like Dorsey who don't do anything but use the safety squat bar. You've even got Johnny's been on safety squat bar for as long as I can remember him squatting. Is there a reason that some people maybe just like it, or do you think it provides an entirely different benefit that maybe the regular bar does not?
The safety squat bar, the squat ratios match up a lot more with the safety squat bar.
Okay.
And not necessarily the straight bar. Like I had a kid come visit from Tennessee. And I tested his 40 because his dad wanted to get him tested based off the equipment that I've got and what he's got. So so he comes in and tests at an explosive mechanics facility so that he can go back home to Tennessee and compare my test results with his test results with his equipment to see where we are and where he's at. He came in, I tested his 40, and I said he should be squatting 225 about that 0.6 meters per second. So I expected him, so we tested the 40 the same day, and then I wanted him to go squat to see where that ratio was. Just like I had a kid that Carson brought to the gym one time. He was a running back at Birmingham, and I tested his 40, and I sent him the next time he came in to the next gym visit and went the same day, and he ran a 4.8 up the 40-yard dash. And so I forgot what his body weight was, but the weight on the bar was 295. And I said, I want you to squat 295, 4 sets of 4, based off what his running speed is. And so just like, you know me, I get distracted at the gym because I'm not controlling the whole group. I'm just kind of wandering around checking on people.
Right.
And I said, oh, shit, I got to go check on that new kid.
Yeah.
And that kid, I was talking, it'd be like me talking to you, or he's squatting with Dorsey, and I was talking to Dorsey or whoever he was squatting with, and that kid chimes in. He goes, the fastest I can move it's 0.6.
Pretty fast.
And I stopped the gym to tell him what a genius I was, because he only got 1.6 per set, but he said the fastest I can get is at 0.6. And I told him what weight to squat off based off his 40 without ever seeing him squat, but he squatted on the safety squat bar.
Right.
Now back to that kid from Tennessee, he came in and his ratio should have been 0.6 at around 225 pounds. And he was able to move 265 on a straight bar at 0.6.
Wow.
But then when I put him to the safety squat bar over there, it went down to 225 at a 0.6.
Okay.
And so then he fell into so for some reason that straight, he had I guess it was just a different, with the safety squat bar being it sits up higher on your shoulders, it lengthens your spine. And so for someone with a longer spine, it's harder to squat.
Right.
And so like that's why they say taller people's harder. So by changing the center of gravity with that bar, put him into the right ratio versus the straight bar got him outside the ratio.
Right.
And so what I should do is track people on the regular bar all the time where they fall in to figure out what that is.
Right.
You know, so, but most of the time it does happen with the safety squat bar. Now, Johnny's back on the safety squat bar, like you said, but for several months, I don't have this folder, he was regular squatting. He would do bob squat. He would do regular squat, and he would box squat with the regular bar, and all those different ways that he was squatting, whatever we chose, he had to stick with for that entire month. He could not go in and box squat with a straight bar, and next time bob squat, next time regular squat. We would come in, we had regular squat for April. We would bob squat for May. We would box squat with straight bar in June. Whatever those months were, his 40-yard dash was not moving at the end of each month. And I looked back at his folder. I said, Johnny, what the hell were we doing when your 40 was getting? And he's so young. He's like, I don't know. I said, geez, Johnny. So
Right.
so that's why he's now back over there, because the last 2 times that we've tested, that's made his 40 move. And I tell people all the time on this podcast that I don't care what type of damn squat you do. If your goal is to run faster and regular straight bar is not doing it, switch to something that will. That's the whole point of testing it. But that's why you'll see people in the gym that still do straight bar box squat. And you got people like Dorsey knows his 40 moves with the safety squat bar.
Right.
Off that box. And some of his friends wanted to go regular. Sometimes his friends would go regular squat because that's what they're going to have to squat in college. Dorsey said, I'll regular squat like they want me to when I get there. But for right now, I want my running speed. And so he actually ended up running a 4.53, the fastest recorded time ever at the gym at 223 pounds.
Yeah.
So he's got a gym record all time, and he's also one of the heaviest ones to do it. Jack Sapping's, I don't know, you know how much he weighed? I don't know.
He looks skinny.
Oh, I do have his folder, don't it? Dang it.
Yeah. Not that much.
Jack, 170.
Wow. And ran what?
A 4.57. He weighed 171, 4.57. Dorsey ran a 4.53 at 223.
Yeah, that's a big difference for sure.
But Dorsey's 4.57, he was squatting 1.97 or something times his body weight.
At that 0.6.
At that 0.6.
Yeah.
And so what's crazy is when he was barely into that 1.97 to 4.53, so you got that 3 from the 2.0 would be a 4.4. So his point, so if he would have had moved at 2.0 times his body weight, he could have ran a high 4.49 or something like that at the gym, but now he's off to Harvard and don't know what that's going to look like when he gets back.
Yeah, I'm interested to see for sure.
Yeah, he wanted to test his bench and all that stuff before he went, so now we got...
Baseline.
Yep.
In the same podcast of Why We Box Squat, you discuss switching people at times to free squats, despite knowing that their running speed may not increase, because you acknowledge there is value in some other things. One thing you mention often is building structure. I switched so-and-so to free squat to build some structure. Their 40 went down, but you decided to do it anyways, knowing that. And so my question from that is, why does free squat build structure and box squat does not?
Because the box squat breaks up the eccentric concentric chain. A regular squat, you don't get that opportunity to break up those 2 contractions.
Okay.
And so they have to learn control of the bar.
Okay.
So like if you take a new person and they never squatted and they just box squat only, you'll notice that over time, they'll just start plopping on the box. They don't have that eccentric strength to stop the load and push it back up.
Right. So first, I guess, what do you mean by structure when you say build structure?
Just the integrity to control the weight more.
Okay.
And so it's just like any type, it's just a base of squatting.
Right.
So a structured squat, it's just almost like everybody always says, is going back to the basics.
Right.
Let's go back to the basic squat, because we need to build that foundation so that you can better utilize that tool later, which is the box.
Right.
And so the structure squat, I just always call it a regular squat. You build that structure, you build the integrity for that kid to go down, squat, and push himself back up, besides relying on that box to catch him as he's lowering himself.
Right.
So
you're teaching the eccentric because you talk about the static dynamic method is breaking up the eccentric and the concentric. But if you don't have the eccentric to begin with, because you don't have the structure, then it's not developed.
Yeah, then it could just be like a plop. You know, sometimes these kids that are like where Johnny, or even like take Levi, for example, he can box squat a lot. But it's not for some reason, it's not helping him. But then he got to the point where he would just plop on the box, feet move around at the bottom. So when they're squatting on the box, because they can squat more weight, and if their feet are moving around, they're not actually pushing into the ground to go up. Their feet's moving. They're just doing whatever it takes to get the weight up.
Right.
And so if you could teach them the regular squat, go about and just build their foundation a little bit more, their feet are less likely to move around when you switch them back to the box.
Right. Last question from this specific podcast is, you make an analysis of how the muscles play kind of a factor with everything else. And the reference you make is tug of war, talking about the tug of war rope. And if you have so many people on either side pulling the rope has the potential to break. So that instantly comes to mind is Colton. Colton's moving 650 pounds on a box squat at not a super heavy weight. So what is it about the way he trained that possibly you could say the muscles were so strong and pulling in such a heavy amount while not carrying a lot of weight, that how does that not fit into that tug of war reference?
The tug of war reference should have been about neural adaptation.
Okay.
So when you're trying to create more neurons, do I have that book here? No, I do not. Dang it.
One of these. Outlive explosive plyos, weightlifting,
nope.
and stuff.
I need. Nope. I got 2 copies of it.
What are you looking for?
Science and Practices. Here we go. It's so new. It's not going over this one with the other one yet. So I'll see if I can try to find this without having read it or highlighted it yet. But the whole point about neuromuscular adaptation is creating more neurons to pull on the fiber.
Okay.
And so if I can create more neurons to pull on that singular fiber, it will contract harder and faster. And so that's done when you have optimal discharge frequency of the nervous system trying to pull on that fiber. And I may be stuttering because I'm trying to find this, but you see these larger motor units.
Yep.
And so these are all recruited at optimal discharge frequency when the load is right.
Okay.
And so when you get a lot more of that, this book does not have there's a picture that I have is power here. Yeah, right here. Let me show you this. Now this book's been used, but I know y'all can't see it or you may not. This, what I'm about to show Daniel, is from the book Power, A Scientific Approach. And it is the muscle up under an electron microscope. And it has the alpha motor neurons laying across the top of the fibers. And the fibers that have that alpha motor neuron running across the top of the fiber, you can see how that muscle, like for Daniel here, you can see the more that neurons on that fiber, you see how much, see those 2 fibers here, this one's not even touched.
Right.
So if I create more of those alpha motor neurons to adhere to that muscle fiber, the harder, you see how much more it's scrunched up and how it looks like a scrunchie.
Right.
Versus this one is just more like a straight pencil.
Right.
And that one in the back right there is innervated a little bit by the alpha motor neuron, but not as much as this.
Right.
And so I wish I would have had my original copy of this book. Training is teaching the body how to adapt over time. And so if the said principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. So if I keep demanding something out of my body, your body's like, basically throws up its hands, oh shit, I guess I'll just give in to whatever this guy is trying to make me do.
Right.
And so that's why it's very important that you continue to have that same stimulus over and over and over again. We're not going front squat one time, regular squat one time, box squat, doing a reverse lunge. We're always sticking to the same thing.
Right.
And it's like Lily said, going to explosive mechanics is like Groundhog Day. It's the same shit over and over. We're going to come in, we're going to box squat. We're going to come in and we're going to jump. Then we're going to do some type of the same accessories over and over and over again. And once we get that result, then we may change some of the accessories here and there. But it's usually you change that when you quit changing. But the main stimulus of the box squat and the bench press, we always come in bench. We don't come in bench press today and incline the next time. We may bench, incline, or we may bench and floor press in the same.
Right.
And saying we're not always changing that up, but I know I'm kind of getting away from that tug of war reference, but I'd really like to freaking find this right here in this Science and Practice of Strength Training book. And it's not following the same, the chapters are different is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
It's got the same chapter title, but they being this, what edition is this? 3rd edition. It's a little bit different than the other one, and the other one's probably at the gym.
Okay.
Dynamic effort method. Okay, here we go. submaximal repeated effort method. See, we're getting to the methods. Maximum effort method. The method of maximum effort is considered superior for improving both intramuscular and intermuscular coordination. The muscles and the central nervous system adapt to only load placed on them. And so, being that we're using the brief maximal tension, is the same thing as the maximum effort method when we're lifting 5 or less.
Right.
You know, like we was talking about kids missing reps the other day. When they're missing reps, we have utilized intramuscular and intercoordination through the central nervous system. And so we are getting all that stuff. Let's see if it says to be, this method should be used to bring forth the greatest strength increments. The CNS inhibition, if it exists, is reduced with this approach. Thus, maximum number of motor units is activated with optimal discharge frequency, and the biomechanical parameters of movement and intramuscular coordination are similar in the values of the main sport. And so a trainee then learns to enhance and memorize these changes in motor coordination on a subconscious level.
Right.
So by giving you the same thing and trying to make you fail within that certain range, because if you're getting those fibers I talked about earlier, where it showed the line of them, if I'm recruiting all of them at one time, we're getting optimal discharge frequency. So with inter and intramuscular coordination, what that means, you got the muscle belly itself firing on all cylinders. Now you're getting that's intra. I get them always. I think that's intramuscular within the same muscle.
Okay.
And intermuscular coordination is going to be all the other surrounding muscles firing optimal discharge frequency to get one job done.
Right.
It's same thing as a baseball throw. Your body has to coordinate together in order to get that one ball to be released.
Right.
And so if my body is used to, like it says over time, it's all done with the central nervous system. So my central nervous system, I don't have a picture of that, but then you can see, I'm trying to look on the computer. I know the people can't see this on YouTube, but if I type in alpha motor neurons, you just go to Google and you'll be able to see what I'm talking. The central nervous system, you got all that. Now, if I just cut your spine, the nerves are not going to work.
Right.
So the muscles are not going to work.
Right.
And so then I have no way to get that tissue to fire.
Right.
And so a lot of times with training, and you're trying to train to failure, is that discharge frequency. And so if there's something called the Hennon and Size principle, if you're not lifting at such a substantial load, those fibers will fire in a sequential order.
Okay.
So your fast twitch will be fired last because it's a bigger motor, it's a bigger fiber. So it's just kind of like the lazy kid on team. You only want to bring them in when you need them because they don't have the stamina to last a lot longer.
Right.
And so, but you can teach that one person to fire off that one time, give them enough break, fire off again. And so, what I was trying to get at is, if you're teaching like traditional methods, like when you're doing 8, 6, 8s, 10s, or 12s, what the body is learning, and you may not be aware, is that it's learning that the slow twitch fibers fatigue first, the intermediates fire, then the fast twitch only learn how to fire and contract in a fatigue state. And so if you're trying to throw a baseball, if you're trying to sprint, you need to have all motor units contract at optimal discharge frequency off the start in order to get the end result to be what you want it to be. Instead of like, it'd be almost like you got faster as the race went on.
Right.
That's not kind of how the nervous system works. So, what you want to go next?
Next, let's see. I watched How We Max People. I think you had a lot of great stuff talking about 5% method there, talking about the difference and how you may do it from bench to squat. Following that, I went to episode 82, which is kind of discussing programming, Q&A, just discussing some things that people had for you. One thing you mentioned is resting longer in order to get stronger. Is that, and then you kind of go on to talk about how some people are out of crunch for time. They only have 30, 45, an hour long to actually get a workout in. Do you think that is the limiting factor, or do you think people actually don't realize that, hey, if I take 3 to 5 minutes between sets, I'm actually going to have the ability to push these sets farther to get stronger, in addition to what helped you realize maybe an optimal rest period and why that was so important?
That finding the optimal rest breaks was done by mistake on my part. Growing up, going to college, high school, like when you're in high school, your strength coaches want to push you through like go, 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 go. And when you get to college, it's the same thing. No rest. And so then if you take someone that's been in that environment and you put them into like a setting like the gym and you try to train all your athletes, like some of the places around us, they'll have those kids in and out in 45 minutes. So you know they're not giving them optimal rest. And so for me, I started the gym out like, because when people at the gym, like that episode, I don't know if I talked about in the episode I've Gotten Solved, people would come out sweating more. People would come out looking like they went through quote unquote a workout.
Right.
Now I've learned over time, it's not about working out, it's about training.
Right.
And so when you're training, you're teaching takes time. And so I just came about the rest breaks by mistake. I was really busy at the gym and I was benching, and I usually had a stopwatch to minimize my sets to around 2 minutes or whatever it was, two or three. And I would be working out. I was like, oh shit, it's been 5 or 6 minutes. I'd go back and I'd bench whatever it was. You could say just 315 for a set of 5. And I'd go back, man, that was easier than it was last set.
Right.
But then I stick to my stopwatch. I rest at 2 minutes and I go back and do that next set. I barely make my reps. And so the next set, I got caught up helping Daniel again. I'm like, damn, it's been 6 minutes. And I go back, and then that was easier. So I started resting longer when I found out that the longer I rested, the more I was able to make my reps.
Right. And we used to do the gym, you used to have us almost run the gym on a stopwatch in that 2 to 3 minute range of, you'd be like, all right, ones go, and then they'd run it all. You'd start the watch. You'd have twos go all the way back through. When that 3 minutes hit, the ones had to be back up and ready to go again. Obviously, it's transitioning from that. Now you have the stronger people take longer. Sometimes the people who don't have as much weight, not as much time, but
yeah, it's kind of like everybody's kind of got everybody's kind of learned how to self-regulate their own rest breaks for optimal. Like I don't even know how long. I think Dorsey toured before he went. He got to where he was resting 8 minutes between his squats.
Wow.
And some people don't quite rest that long. Like we had trying to get James to work the other day. We had him resting 2 minutes, dying, just for different purposes.
Yeah.
But so, and then I said, okay, then we started powerlifting. This was around 2009 or 10. You go to a powerlifting meet, you may be resting 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Between each attempt. So why not replicate that at the gym? And when I started doing that, people started getting much stronger. And for some people saying, like when we had COVID at the gym, the first hour, because I had to have the people in and out in an hour and we never shut down, is that, all right, if they at the 4 o'clock, but the thing about COVID is I don't start on time now. We may start at 4:05, 4:10, 5:05. We don't we start at the top of the hour, but not on time.
Right.
And so during that time, all right, you need to be ready for your first set at 4:10. I gave them 10 minutes to warm up. And then once they got warmed up, then they were probably finishing whether their bench or their squat at 4:30, 4:35. You still had about 20 or something minutes, 20, 25 minutes to get your squat done. And then if it's 4:35, then you got 25 minutes to get your accessories. And you can treat your accessories more of like the repetition method, to where you're just using the bodybuilding to where you're not resting as long. You're not resting that long on leg curls. You're not resting that long on curls. You're not resting that long with your tricep press downs and your overhead extensions. So you could actually get in and out within an hour if you started on time and you gave that window of when they needed to be ready for their first set.
Right.
And sometimes a trick we used, so for me, for benching, for an example, or I did this to Jordan Yates when he was squatting, I'll give that example instead of myself. Jordan would go and squat 135, he'd jump to 225, he'd jump to 275, and he'd jump to 315. And if he had 385 for his reps that day, when he got to 315, he'd squat down and stand up, and me and another person would be on the other side, and we'd slot a 25 on, so he'd squat down, stand up. So he did 315 and 365 in the same set without having to re-rack the bar.
Right.
And sometimes when if you're benching, if your first set's 315, you warm up at 135, you go to 225, you go to 275, you do like 2 reps of 275, but then you have someone on each side of the bar, and after your second rep, you hold it, let them slide a 10 on, you go down, and you press it up. Now you've already done 295, so now you can rest a little bit longer before you have to start your first set if you need to have some time constraints and stuff like that.
Right, makes a lot of sense.
And so here I finally got this picture. You see the neurons, how they're going to, it looks like fingers. So the more people, like for that tug of war reference, the more I get on this one side of the rope,
right,
it's like that 10-man versus 2 on the side. So the more neurons I can get to adapt, which is that number of people on the other side of the rope for tug of war, the harder and faster I'm going to pull that rope.
Right.
But the rope being the muscle tissue.
Okay.
And so this is where you're just kind of getting back, I think, to Colton. You have to increase. That's why sometimes you got to utilize the repetition method, because you have to increase the size of that fiber that neuron's pulling on. Because if you got too much nerve innervation, it's almost like trying to pull a tractor out of a ditch with a rope versus a cable.
Right. And so you're doing hypertrophy for those muscle fibers to thicken the rope, essentially, so that when you have all these different nerve endings grabbing onto them, it's just working in a better system.
Yes.
Okay.
But you see, it looks just like a hand.
Right.
I've used the example before where if I put my hand on the table or put my hand on a sheet of paper, and if I just got my thumb and my pinky, I'm only going to scrunch up that paper so much.
Right.
That paper representing that muscle fiber.
Right.
And so now if I get my middle finger and my index finger, now when I pull on that paper, I've got a lot more power to contract and squish that paper.
Right.
And so that's basically how the nervous system works to create contraction. And so that's why these kids at the gym are not very big, but they're super strong, because I'm training them. I'm training the nervous system more than the muscular system.
Right.
And sometimes, like with what James is doing right now, he's training the muscular system.
Right. He's trying to thicken that rope so that when those...
So we can apply more force to it later.
Right.
So
makes sense. Continuing in that programming Q&A, you mentioned... You started adding some box jumps. You started adding some hurdle jumps, stuff like that. Back when I went to the gym, we did it a long, long time ago. Then there's a period we didn't, and there's a period we went back. You mentioned seeing people not necessarily increase the second half of their 40. You saw that the first half of their 40 was improving as a result of these box squats. And then you go on to talk about how you need to add more elastic lifts, make people more elastic in order to decrease that second half of the 40. You want to just discuss maybe the thought process behind adding that, how you realize maybe the second half was still notable to increase, so on and so forth.
Yeah. You could take a kid and he could run a 2, 8, 8, 20, but he could run a 5, 0, 1, 40.
Right.
And you could take another kid that runs a 2.89 and he can run a 4.9040.
Right.
Or 288 or a 29. Let's go this, because this actually I had a kid around a 288, and Skowski ran a 290 but ran a 490, and this kid ran a 288 but ran a 501.
Right.
And so you got a 2.00 back half on that one, and whatever. So 1 point, was that right?
Yeah. 1/10 of a difference in the second half. Yeah, same exact in the first half.
0.13, right?
Yeah.
And so he was 1300ths of a second slower in the back half.
Right.
Versus the other kid actually ran a 290 versus the 288.
Right.
And so me knowing that he did a lot of running because he was at Clemson, and they just did a lot of more top end sprint speed stuff. So I wondered, with the first half, you got longer ground contact time because you're putting so much power into the ground to get that 20-yard dash. But the 20-yard dash, this kid right here would be just as good as this kid.
Right.
And making a play on the field because he's got that
first
sprint,
20.
The first 20, which you're not really ever going to run more than 20 yards, especially at a linebacker or a defensive end.
Right.
Anyway, the only people that's going to be running further than that, it's going to be your DBs or your safeties.
Yeah. In other sports, you got your baseball players rounding bases. Obviously, your first 90 feet is to first base. You hit a double. That second 90 from first to second could be some of that elastic stuff you're talking about. Maybe track runners, maybe soccer players. For the few times they do have that extended sprint, lacrosse players, whatever it may be. So there is importance in it. But that first 20 is obviously the focus part, which I agree.
Yeah, it's the number one thing.
Right.
And so once we know we're running a 288, but you're running a 501, me knowing that someone had ran a 290 and they ran a 490, because at the end of the day, for these kids, they're going to camp, they're still getting based off that 40. No one's timing their 20.
No.
Although you got the same kids that can play on the field at the same speed.
Right.
They're 40 showing up at different speeds, and that can be the difference between getting recruited and not getting recruited.
For sure.
And so I had this kid that ran the 501. I had him, for some reason, go over and jump on a 30-inch box, off and on, just like ground contact time, kind of almost like the hurdles, just jump, land, jump, land, jump, land.
Right.
And he jumped on a box, landed on the ground, and he almost looked like he got stuck. He couldn't reverse his own energy.
Right.
And I said, that could be why he's worse in the back half of the 40. It's not designed to help it, because now we're going to make our ankles stiffer by landing, because it's going to be a lot more absorbed through the lower half of the body.
Right.
And being able to take that, I think the kid weighed 210 to 220 pounds, take that 100, land it on the ground and get it back off, land it on the ground, get it back off. And so once I was really surprised at how he was not able to reverse himself, at least for the first two sets of the box jumps. By the third set, he started getting it.
Right.
But then over time, it did help his back half of his 40. We probably went from a 0.13 to a 0.15 or whatever it was, but it did not get to this guy. This guy was doing, he just had the higher top end speed.
Right.
And I'd like to see I'd like to see Dorsey was a 1.90 back half.
Yep.
Joey Blunt was a 190.
What were they in the first half?
So Joey ran, they both had a 190, but Joey's 40 was a 4.59, and Dorsey's was a 4.53. So they both had the same top end speed, but Dorsey had a little bit better 20.
Right.
And if he's playing linebacker at Harvard, that's going to utilize him more, but the 40 is going to help him get looks at more as far as if you were going to the NFL or if you had your pro day or whatnot with that.
Right. So are you basing who and how you give elastic stuff based on maybe the person and what their need is? Obviously, me as a pitcher, I may not need that as much as a DB who reaches that top end speed like Joey. So are you just kind of programming, hey, elastic speed is just important in general. Doing 3 sets of box jumps is only going to take you 5 minutes. I'm just going to add it in regardless. In addition to, will you give maybe the people watching this 3, maybe 4 options of different ways to work on that elastic stuff? Obviously, we do some hurdle jumps, box jumps. Is there anything else that may target that elastic side?
We've done single leg jumps and trying to get 10 yards and within 3 jumps off of one leg. Bounds and stuff, but we don't. You've seen that we've not done that in a long time. But those are ideas for others if they want to try.
Right.
But I don't like to give a lot of exercise unless I know it utilizes this result.
Right.
All right. Hey, you see all this on Instagram. You see all these little gimmicks. They're going to make you feel that it's going to give you what you want, but no one's testing it. Just because you get a kid that'll feel an exercise, but it's not producing a result. What's the point in feeling something if it's not going to give you what you want? You're then it's basically like going to work and not getting paid. You're putting the work in, but your result's the payment of the work or effort that you put in.
Right. To continue off that, more Nordics have been showing up at the gym in the past year, maybe 2 years, and something that maybe 10 years ago that we didn't do. Is there something that brought... We always did the hamstring stuff. We did the GHR. We did the RDL, stuff like that. But the Nordic eccentric aspect of the training is relatively new. Is there a reason you brought that on? Was it a health reason? Was it hey, I saw this correlate with more sprint speed stuff? Just how did that come about?
Trying to see the hamstrings are supposed to help with the back half of the 40.
Okay.
That's the reason I bought the back attack. Mm-hmm. I was trying, because you could do good mornings, but I had a kid demonstrate a good morning, and his form was atrocious. I said, there's no way I can load that kid heavy with that form, where the back attack would allow that. So with the Nordics and things, I just bought the Nordic benches to see if it would help.
Okay.
And I'm not really seeing a whole lot of it pick up in terms of helping the back half of the 40. That's I bought the Nordics. Then I went and bought the back attack later to see if I get the, without having to do the box jumps and without having to do the extra sprint stuff, can I just make us more strong in the right areas to get that same result without having to do that? So I need to try to figure out if the back attack's helping the back half, if the Nordics were helping the back half. So now I got squats that help the front half. If I can pinpoint that exercise and I know that helps the back half.
Right.
And so now we're getting faster in the first half. We're getting faster in the second half. Then if I just sprint them.
Right.
Because it's like that kid, once he was doing the box jumps, I think sometimes I go away from it and I come back to it. I think you still need to sprint. But I try not to sprint so that I can get the kid to know that if they're getting stronger, they're getting faster. If not, because you've been at the gym for years, box squatting at the gym or squatting at the gym just sucks in general because it's heavy shit all the time.
Yep.
And if I back off the squat, the 40 don't change. So what I need to try to do is I need to get the kids to learn that heavy squatting, we're doing no running, no box jumps, nothing else, and we're getting faster. Get them faster for 2 or 3 months in a row. Then I could sprinkle some more of that stuff in. Like I've got one of my online people, for the first 2 months, he's not done any running in his 20s or 40. He just does the workouts. At the end of the month, his dad's got the Brower system, so he's been testing his 40 just like we'd had the same system at the gym. And in season, the kid's gotten faster and faster. And so this time, I told the dad the week before, he tests the kid, have him do 20-yard sprints. And he said, what's the reason? I said, because as they're getting stronger, as they're getting more trained, as they're getting more developed, when I would test the kids at the gym, we would run the 40-yard dash the last week of the month. And if you ran 3 or 4 40s on that day and you did that on a Tuesday, your rectus femoris on that Thursday was super sore, so it was hindering your squat.
Right.
And so by doing the 20s the week before, it's almost like working out the week before. You're kind of getting some of the soreness, but you're not getting a degree because you're not sprinting that distance. So I'm eliminating the soreness test week by doing the 20-yard sprints the week prior.
Right.
But I don't know if I covered but I try not to sprint them because I don't need them to think that the sprint's making them.
Right.
And the only reason I sprint them is to prevent soreness as they get more trained.
Right.
And so I try not to, for years, and we never did 20s and stuff.
Continuing on to the How I Read Books podcast, I guess just first and foremost, how much of your learning do you feel like is from these books taken away? Obviously, you mentioned a little bit earlier in this same podcast that there were things that you were trying and you're like, oh, I think I figured this out. Later on, you realize that it's in a book. So I guess how much do you feel like is it from books? How much do you feel like it's talking from Louis and some of these other guys? How much do you feel it's just from kind of trying things on your own and figuring out if you're talking to someone, maybe listening to this, are you going to push them, hey, I think reading books is really important. I think talking to other people is really important. I think trying things for yourself is really important. How did you get to where you are if you're trying to push someone to know as much as you did? Which direction are you pushing them the strongest?
Read books and challenge the book. Like even some of the books, like Science of Practice Strength Training, Super Training, you can read stuff in them. And I learned or didn't realize this till about maybe even this past year. As one of the biggest takeaways I've learned is that, okay, I've been doing this, like I said earlier, and I got this result. But then you also learn, I've been doing it this way. Now you go back and read that book. what if that book would have had that study done that way? They could have got this result. And so it's almost like sometimes the whole point about science and this whole industry is challenge what the book says or does. I don't take the book for its word. I read the word,
Right.
then I go challenge it. Just like I've done, with the static dynamic, you increase absolute strength and rate of force at the same time by using the box SWAT. So the box SWAT is a static dynamic method and you see it show up over and over, month after month, kid after kid, male, female, it don't matter. And over time, they get faster. Like Joey, he started off at a 4.8 or 4.9 at the gym. He got down to a 4.5, and he box squatted.
Right.
And so it's just, and I have read stuff. I went and have done it, and I not got the same result.
Right.
Or I've read stuff in the book. I read what the result, and my result was far greater. Like you don't see the dumbbell jumps in super training. They were utilizing jumps with a bar on the back at 50 to 60 at a higher percent. Well then, but if you read the first half of the book where it talks about speed strength, it needs to be utilized at 20%. But if you put 20%,
And that's where you came up with the dumbbell jumps.
Yes.
It was a 20%. You just wanted to push
Yeah,
it
and
down.
I wanted to use the dumbbells because I was doing jumps with the bar on your back. When you get to jumping so high, that bar comes off your back and it hits your damn neck and it hurts.
Yeah.
But the bar, with having a bar on your back and you're jumping with it, you've changed your center of gravity. For years, I've always been a thought process of you have to increase the external resistance of whatever movement that you're trying to do. So if you're trying to bench press, you have to add load to increase load. And so for box one, you're not going to squat the bar 135 forever and still continue to get faster. You have to still increase the stimulus. And so if you want to jump higher, you have to jump with some type of load so that when you don't have that load, you're faster. So the whole point in increasing absolute strength, improving strength improves speed of movement. That's why steroids are bad.
Right.
Because it helps with the recovery and it makes them stronger. You give a baseball player, if he swings the bat 10 miles an hour faster, that ball's coming off that bat at a much higher rate. And if you're playing the infield, that's then what makes it dangerous for the sport of baseball. It's ball speed on the infield. It's not ball speed in the outfield.
Right.
And so years ago, this was before I even started digging into science and practice training or science of sports training. I've got that book. I should have. But I would jump with a weighted vest on. This is at the first gym. I don't know if you were ever at the first.
The first one on Sonoya Road?
Yeah, it was over there next to where, it was not where Kyle and Casey went.
It was a little bit further down the road.
It was down.
Upstairs.
Yeah, we would push the prowler shit on plywood upstairs.
Yeah.
This is before I even had the jump mats. And I'd put a weighted vest on and I would jump up and hit the vertec. I would do that for so many weeks. Then after so many weeks, I would start with a 20-pound vest. I'd go with a 40-pound vest, and then I'd wear a 40-pound with a 20-pound vest. And so I would go week 1, 20, week 2, 40, week 3, 60 pounds. And that fourth week, I've always kind of used that fourth week as like a deload week. Like hear people say deload training. Deloading is basically just cutting your volume in half.
Right.
So if you're normally doing 4 sets, you can do 2 sets, or you can just do 4 sets but drop the load percentage to 60 to 65. And as far as young kids go, I don't really see a need for deload.
Right.
But I've always had that last week. So like on Tuesday of the last week of the month, if the kid comes all the time, we're sprinting that day. We're not squatting.
Right.
So it's a different stimulus. So you can, I guess, if you want to quote unquote, it's a deload week because testing week, when we first started, I didn't have as much stuff as I do now. So we would test 20s and broad jump on Tuesdays, and Thursdays we would test 40s and vertical because I didn't have as many lasers. I only had the start box and 1 set of lasers. And as the gym grew and I got more money, I now can test the 10, the 20, and the 40 at the same time, where at the beginning I did not have that. So that's why I treated the first week as a deload week. It was just the last week was a test week, and that's kind of how it's evolved. But now the last week of the month still test week, but we're able to get the 10, 20, 40 done in one day. We're able to go vertical jump and broad jump, so we don't have them kill in 2 days. Now Thursday if they broke their sprint on Tuesday, now they're back to the grind. They're back squatting. They're
Right.
back on the normal routine because they don't have to test. But now, if they had a bad test on Tuesday, they're more welcome to retest on that Thursday. And some people just want to test just to get out of squatting because it's
Right.
it's
It's a
that
day
bad.
off.
And so, going back to the weighted vest thing and the jumping with external resistance is week 1 was 20, week 2 was 40, week 3 was 60, and I was testing my vertical at the end. Well, what happened when I took the weighted vest off and I jumped up in the air, I call it I lost my balance in the air. I got up and I swung, and I was so used to having, when you get to that third week and you got 60 pounds on your chest, your center of gravity is way the freak off.
Yeah.
And so when I bent down to stand back up without that extra, that when you bend over with the weighted vest on, it's almost like pushing you forward. And so when I came up and I was up in the air, I came down, I landed on my ankle, and I had to go to the hospital because I probably broke my ankle, but it was so swollen that the X-ray wouldn't show it, and I was too hard-headed to go back and get it rechecked because I wasn't going to wear a boot.
Right.
So I got to the hospital. They wanted to give me crutches and a boot. I said, Jared, don't wear a boot, and he don't do crutches. And I woke up the next day and had to call, Donna went to work, I had to call my mom to bring me some crutches because I could not touch my foot to the ground, but I was not wearing a boot.
Right.
So with that, then if you try to jump with a bar on your back, it's almost the same thing as the weighted vest.
Right.
And so then, like there's this thing called Supercat or whatever. Do you remember it had the chains and stuff? We had that for a small stint, and I was trying different modules of ways to jump. And when I jumped with dumbbells and I jumped with the weight and then I jumped without the weight, my center of gravity was not off.
Right.
I was almost able to replicate and feel the same thing in the air, loaded versus unloaded, versus with the changing of the weighted vest. When I go to bend over, it was pushing me forward. With the dumbbell jumps, it felt more natural. And so and people can use a trap bar, but the thing about the trap bar is if it's a 40 or 50 pound trap bar, you're already getting out of the loaded range for some of these athletes to even get the right result with. And if they're just jumping with the trap bar themselves and they're not measuring it with a jump mat or an OVR, they're jumping just to jump, or if they're doing repeated effort jumps, like if you were to go jump with 30s and you were to jump 3 times in a row on the mat, you may, if you're able to get a 30, next probably 28, 27 or whatever, and it's also going to be higher for you to rebound after. If you were to get max effort and hit a 30, you're not going to get another 30.
Right.
And you may have such a drastic drop after your second jump because jumping with a 30 at maximum effort and landing and trying to repeat that immediately is very hard to do. So you're not going to, more than likely, you're not going to jump a 30 on your first one because you got 2 more to get afterwards.
Right. Would that be a good way to test the elasticity of an athlete, is possibly make them jump 3 times and see, maybe they go 30, 26, 23. So maybe they take a huge jump versus maybe someone who, like you talked about Skowski earlier, maybe he would have been 30, 28, 26. So he's less of a fall off. Do you think that is a fair way to possibly measure that, or just...
I mean, it's possible as long as we can figure out, as long as it shows up at the end of the month in a positive, because I want a monthly result.
Right.
I don't want to, there's too many variables if it's a 3-month result. And so over 3 months, what really created that response? You know, if you could take something, like if you can just take them and squat them and jump them and you go test a 40 and the 40 got better, that's the minimum thing you need to do to really get your 40 better. But if you want to have some type of structural integrity and not pull a hamstring or have hip issues, or some other issues, you may need those accessories so you don't fall apart as your engine gets bigger.
Yeah. Talking about accessories, in that same podcast, you go on talking about how the most important thing bench day, for instance, you mentioned your incline. All you do is incline tricep press down. So bench days, if people maybe don't want to do something, it's bench tricep press down. Same thing, squat days, it's the box squats and the dumbbell jumps. Part of it is you don't want to keep putting, I would assume, tread sled. I think you found some good results with the tread sled, but so many people complained about it. So many people didn't do it that maybe it started being featured less often. So my question is, how much of a difference would you program an athlete if, say, he's the perfect athlete, he's going to do everything at the great effort, versus maybe a common person who's not going to do that? Because you also go on to talk about more isn't necessarily better because you want the capacity to still perform the next workout. So even if the guy did his box squats, his jumps, his tread sled, his hamstrings, anything else there may be, that may have a negative effect on, if that's on a Tuesday, on the Thursdays, squat day, dumbbell jumps, stuff like that. So I guess if you did have someone who effort wasn't a problem, I think we talked about Brooks earlier, you didn't have the same knowledge you do now, the same capacity, but the effort was way higher. So I think you found the same results, even though they were in different ways, to where if you took a person with maybe Brooks's effort, but maybe your knowledge now, that it may work. So I guess just for coaches, obviously there's a dilemma in knowing how to train one athlete versus the next based on effort level. Even writing numbers and percentages is going to affect that. So I guess, is the extent of the workout going to change based on athletes' effort levels?
Yeah, I used to have to tell Brooks not to do something.
Yeah.
But Brooks always wanted to do something and do more because he felt if he did not do it, and this is where that feeling things come back into play, is he felt if he didn't do it, he wouldn't get better because it was more of feelings. And so when he gave high, a general rule is the more effort someone puts in, the less exercises they have to do. Mm-hmm. And so for the lower effort person that's going through it half-ass or not really trying to get as much out of that accessory, mm-hmm. they may have to do more accessories in order to get the same response because their level of effort that's not creating that response. So you got to give them more. Just like that one kid that comes to gym that don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
I don't want to say his name. But
becomes babysitting almost.
Yeah, and so he's not changing because he's not, number one, giving effort. Not number two, he's not doing all the accessories.
And the consistency of showing up is going to play a factor. You have a lot of kids come in and say, oh, I did my squats this month and my sprint speed didn't change. Why? And you're like, well, and even if they are consistent, if the effort's not there to where they're not pushing themselves to that 85% max to where trying to get those 0.6s, you can still see the same lack of benefits in it.
Yeah, just if they're not, the more effort, the less total work they have to do. Mm-hmm. So,
continuing on with some of the running stuff, you talk about in the same podcast about hip flexor tightness and whatnot, talking about how the box squat, because of the angle they're getting at versus the full range and the full squat, you've started to notice people with some hip flexor tightness. And then obviously you've started incorporating some of these lunges with the knee over toe stuff. If you're keeping that torso straight, you're getting a good stretch in the hip flexors and you're seeing that kind of increase in the 40 time. Is that something you got with just having conversations with athletes, noticing guys' hip flexors, or possibly reading a book and seeing that having that longevity of the hip flexor is beneficial? In addition to, if you found that, what's to say maybe hamstring flexibility doesn't have a correlation, or calf or quad, or maybe spinal mobility, whatever else that may be, could influence these same things?
I think a lot of it really stems from your hip there, so your upper leg, mm-hmm. your quads and your hammies a lot. Your hip flexor where it crosses. I did notice the people that box squatted all the time and did not do, but for a long time we didn't do knee over toe lunges.
No.
And for a long time we would, for small stints, we would do Bulgarian squat, which still stretches the hip flexor. I did notice that over time, if you just box squat all the time without adding in like a Bulgarian squat or without adding like a knee over toe lunges, those kids, Colton was tighter. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why him squatting that 625 pound box squat at 190 pounds did not equal to the greater 40 of what it should be, because he never regular squatted at all. And so when he would go to these camps and I would try to even work on stretching him, he was tight.
Yeah.
And you could see when I would take him to a powerlifting competition, he didn't have the mobility with the regular squat over time. And so I just started seeing that over and over. It's the people that, like for me, for myself, I pause squatted and I was able to take my vertical up to a 30, but I had the discipline to pause squat. So I was getting full range and doing what I needed to, where some of the other kids, they don't have that discipline. So just give them the easy route of the box squat, because it takes care of, you're going the right height every time. You're not having to switch this up, but it will make you tighter.
Right.
But it's okay to box squat all the time, but now you have to make sure you add some type of single leg stuff like a Bulgarian or a knee over toe style lunge so that you do not get bound up. Now the Bulgarian and knee over toe lunge, if you're squatting really heavy and you're doing your dumbbell jumps right, you don't have to necessarily overload the Bulgarian squats to a degree of like you're squatting 185 or 205 with a Bulgarian squat.
Right.
You can just do your knee over toe lunges with maybe a 45-pound bar. You don't have to. The whole purpose of those things are because we didn't do them back in the day.
No, we did not.
And so the only underlying purpose of adding those in is to prevent that tightness.
Yeah.
It's not to get in there and try to show off where like when Jeff Okuda was coming, the Lions wanted him to do 185 on Bulgarian squat, but didn't care about anything else. And it's kind of like, why is that in your protocol, you know? And so the strength standards of some of these teams are totally different.
Right. Which I think at that level, obviously, and maybe some of the kids around here, the biggest goal is go get that scholarship, go get an offer. Or maybe it's not, maybe it's just to perform at the highest level. By the time for someone like Okuda, who's in the NFL, is performing at a really high level, health is such an important thing, especially as age continues.
They don't have to, like, even like when my guys go from college to NFL or that professional level, some of them don't want to push because they're scared to get hurt.
Correct.
Like when Joey's with the Cardinals, and once he squatted with me all through high school, during college, even through COVID time, gets that NFL contract, you're not going to squat anymore.
Yeah, now he's scared to lose that, which is, you recognize it, but
they've got there. So maybe they'd probably, once you get your foot in the door, you're pretty much in the door. You don't have to, once the NFL times are 40,
right,
and once you get on the roster,
the risk reward is different.
Yeah, and so you've already squatted all those years to get to that contract level,
right?
And so, and for me, it's a hard transition to just let them do baby work, like single leg work, because they're working and they may be preventing injury and stuff like that, but that's a thought we have. We're assuming that they're preventing injury.
Right.
And so it's
stronger is healthier. Stronger prevents more injuries. But to the point of, I think these lunges and other aspects you started adding in is you recognize, one, I think the performance can increase with some of this mobility stuff, but the health is also being touched on at the same time. Having that length, I think, is important. So I think for your athletes pushing that 40, obviously you found a good correlation with the hip flexors. So you think the hip flexors is an important stretch, maybe one or two more things, or do you think that is
I was reading in Super Training, there's no way that I'm going to find it. Is there? See, I didn't know some of these questions. I told Daniel, don't tell me the questions beforehand, because I do better off the cuff instead of have time to go look through books, then I'll overthink something, then I'll overcomplicate it, then I go down more rabbit holes. So I just wanted him to ask me these questions that he's found through the podcast so we could talk about it. But then it rises these questions that I know where they are, these books.
In How I Read Books, you had a little paper you talked about keeping an index. Where the heck's your index, Jared?
I don't know. What's...
That's there. You want that one?
Grab that Super Training book right there. See what's. But I don't know what I did. I've got so many damn copies of Super Training that I don't even know what the hell's going on. And is this one highlighted at the beginning? Yes. Okay. You see how I highlighted? I've taken this book. Now I've got asterisks by what I think is kind of important with the second volume of it.
Right.
But I don't know where. Okay, look. Oh, that's kind of, I like to talk about that a little bit too. I'm going to set that right there. I don't know where my papers are for the index. It'd be nice if, you brought that up. I don't know where they are. I was indexing like on this page 138. It says, speed of movement is associated with large, fast, and slow fiber composition of muscles, which possesses different contractile and metabolic qualities. Athletes who pose a large portion of fast fibers in their muscles under equal conditions display greater movement speed. So I tell people if you're trying to create more fast twitch fibers, fast twitch fibers are not created by doing fast movements.
Right.
Fast twitch fibers are recruited and have a shift in intermediate fibers to go more toward the fast side with the extremely heavy loads, because that's how they're being discharged and targeted to go here or there. So now once you have more motor neurons on that fiber, the speed of movement stuff, like with the dumbbell jumps or like quote unquote plyo stuff, you're enhancing the rate coding at which now that newly acquired neuron is at that fiber. And so it's been shown like the muscles of sprinters contain more, up to 75% fast contractile fibers. Long distance runners have upward to 90% low contractile fibers. And so if you got sprinters having 75% fast twitching, you got long distance runners having 90% slow, that's only 10% fast.
Right.
And so that lets you know that stuff is trainable. And so if you're not a naturally quick twitch person, depending on what you do, will utilize just like that specific adaptations to impose demands thing. So whatever you push your body to do, it will eventually adapt and get that done.
Right.
I thought I read something in here around one of these pages that had something to do with the hip flexors, but of course I didn't have those questions with the load earlier, so I'm not going to be able to get to what I want. All right, let's move on before I get too distracted with this book.
No problem. To continue in kind of the same topic of discussion, I think sport-specific training has become very popular in a lot of stuff. I think we won't even go baseball here. We'll go just more with the same football, maybe basketball, and the ability to change directions at a high rate. We talk about the 40 a lot. We talk about the vertical jump a lot, which are both very linear movements in terms of the ability to change direction. Do you think there is credit in possibly working on stuff to change directions? What maybe parts of the muscles or the knees or the hips do you think play the biggest piece in changing directions? And is just being strong in general going to train those? I know you mentioned a lot, like the muscles don't know specific things. They just know how to kind of contract in the way they're meant to. So in terms of working on the changing direction, one, for the speed of it, being able to plant and get going, in addition to the health of being able to do it on a consistent basis.
Change of direction or agility style stuff. Agility is the ability to change direction while moving. So if I take a 20-pound med ball and I were to throw it at you versus me taking that 20-pound med ball and throwing it at Johnny, you're stronger than Johnny, so you're going to be able to absorb that force and give it back better. So like if you take it to a weaker person, they're not going to be able to absorb that force, so it's going to come into more of their chest and maybe fall over. Versus the stronger you are, so that's why like you got like a offensive lineman, they're heavy. They may squat 400 pounds, but if they weigh 300 pounds, squatting that 400 is not that impressive, because everything in sports is about relative strength. How strong are you relative to how much you weigh? And so increasing strength and relative strength matters is highly important for agility, because if you take your body, say Dorsey's body at 223 pounds, and he's moving this direction, he's got to be able to stop that 223-pound body, absorb the force, and give it back in the opposite direction. So the stronger he is, the better he'll be able to change that direction, because he can absorb that force.
Right. So in terms of, you got pitchers, the elbow works in a way that it's not made to. For instance, the knee is supposed to bend and unbend, but sometimes when you're cutting, it's bending in that wrong direction. Is the argument still true for that, even though the knee and the elbow oftentimes work in possible planes that they're not anatomically meant to?
The muscles still cross that joint the same, regardless of which position that's in. So whatever's crossing that joint makes that joint move. So like when my tricep crosses my elbow joint and it's made to extend the arm, regardless of my arm is pronated or supinated,
Right.
that tricep is still working in that same manner, regardless of which that position that limb's in, because that muscle crosses that joint, like the pec crosses the shoulder, and the primary function of the pec is to bring the arm across the body. And so, regardless of whether it's high, low, or intermediate, the pec is still stretched out at the shoulder, and to get it to come in, the pec's going to contract there. So it's kind of like the stronger my overall pec is, the better it can handle. Being it's stronger overall, it can handle different awkward positions.
Right. And for the health benefit of things in terms of ligaments and tendons, obviously the big one for baseball is the UCL, the big one for possibly football is the ACL. The best way to, I guess, thicken those is to have load. You've got to load. You've got to have heavy stuff in order to load it. Doing low load stuff doesn't actually have the ability to thicken those, and the thicker they are, the less likely they are to break. It's the whole drink more milk and your bones get thicker argument, except for ligaments. So you've got to add that heavy load.
Yes, and again, I've got this new edition that's not highlighted, so the stuff I'm going to try to find to is not going to be as quickly able to get to as I want to. But if you can, at the end of the book, the good thing about the end of these books, you got the summary.
Right.
So if you got the book Science of Practice Strength Training, at the end of each chapter is a summary of what the chapter talked about, and it talks about ACL injury right here. And so it's not going to give me the answer right here that I want to, but it says for women somewhere they have to lift at 90% or above in order to strengthen the ligaments and the tendons. And so it talks about the physiology between men and women. Where is the development of strength in women is dramatically related, as in men, to resistance loading schemes. Many times the use of not using heavy 3 to 5 rep max or 90% above, the training program can reduce the effectiveness of optimization. It has been well established that women need heavy resistances in order to develop maximum strength. And I was trying to figure out, I can't read the sentences as quick because in my other book, I've got where they have to lift heavy loads, but then I got down here to where it strengthens ligaments. So now you got to read this entire paragraph is what I'm trying to get at, as not being able to find what I was really.
Right. It's interesting, though, that it says for women it's the 90, because obviously we talk a lot about that 85% threshold having to be above that, and it's suggesting that women is possibly even higher. So the effort levels for women have to be even further to possibly increase the same amount of gains that men do, because women are going to have to push themselves that much harder. They're going to have to suffer that much more. They're probably going to have to miss that many more reps in order to possibly reap those same benefits.
Yeah, and I probably need to read this book separately from what I read, because the chapters are structured a little differently. So, because I know the other book, I can find stuff quicker. And I know it, and I know it's highlighted, so it's twice the speed of what I can do right now.
While he looks for that, following this, we're going to move into the It's Okay to Miss Reps podcast. Several notes from that as well. After that, I've got how we get screwed up. One question from that. But, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, people. I'm not going to be able to find what I was wanting to in there, but it does. A lot of the strength training programs are not it's said for women, and it says in some of these other books that you have to lift at that 85+% in order to yield those results. And a lot of times when you see programming out there, they're having you do 8, 9, or whatever rep range that is. So yeah, you are doing an exercise, but you're not enhancing the strength ability of the tissue in order to actually get the result that you're looking for. So you may be doing the right exercise, but if you're doing the right exercise with a wrong load, you're still spinning your wheels. You're doing nothing.
Right. It's just less efficient. You can get stronger to an extent, but at what cost, at what rate? Obviously, we're talking about possibly 10, 15 pounds a month in terms of maxes for people at times. And if you're doing it not in the right rep range at maybe 10 to 15 pounds every 3-4 months as a result. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, moving on to this It's Okay to Miss Reps podcast. First thing I talk about is what you discussed, adjusting the box height, possibly the squat stances from being narrow to wide in relation to sprint speed. I mean, just talk about box squat stuff in general, and you often reference the 40 time, the 40 time, the 40 time. What do you say for people who don't care about the sprint speed? James came in and asked the same question. For me, obviously, I don't care how fast I run from the pitcher's mound to home plate. We had a swimmer sign up the other day. People like that, or just tennis players, obviously they sprint to an extent. What do you say for people who don't do that? Obviously, you use the 40 to reference if the squat variation is working. So would you say, even though me as a pitcher, the 40 speed doesn't matter, are you still going to use that as a reference to say, oh, we're getting the most benefit out of this? Because you could say squatting 400 pounds in a back squat isn't as good as maybe 350 pounds on a box squat because the 40 is going up in the box squat compared to the... So at what degree do you say, oh, okay, just relative and absolute strength is more important compared to this explosive strength of that? Because obviously I'm still an explosive athlete, the way I put force in the ground, and we use 40 to replicate that. I think you're sort of getting my gist.
Yeah, the squatting is good for you because it just increases lower body power. Mm-hmm. So now, you said swimmer.
Swimmer.
He's depending on what he's doing within the sport. So if he's a sprinter, if he's just going down the back, but if he's doing breaststroke, then the legs don't even matter. So
right.
If they have to come off the block
mm-hmm.
and they got to hit the water, the further they can jump out, the faster they'll be.
Correct.
When especially when it's a short time sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you, with a sport, whether like with you in baseball, when you're in the loaded position and you got to push into the ground, mm-hmm. you're having to still utilize the static dynamic because you're static, boom, then you have to accelerate.
Right.
So any type of sport that you have to accelerate with, I still think that the box squat or the pause squat will give you the best bang for the buck because it enhances your rate of force development
right.
and gives you absolute strength. But now, on the other hand, whether those sports or not, because you still do get people that get a faster 40-yard dash with regular squatting.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not trying to necessarily get the best 40-yard time, if you're a baseball, well, you still need the box squat. You're not going to run a good 60 unless your 40 is good.
Right.
So usually I see at the gym, if someone comes into me running a 7.2 60, they're usually running almost identical 2 seconds slower. So like mm-hmm. if they're coming to me running a 7.2, they're running a 5.2 in the gym.
Right.
And so if you get like someone like Demers, when he ran a 6.7, mm-hmm. He was also running a 4.7 at the gym. So usually you got about that 2 second window for right. the baseball 60. So if you're still having to run a 60-yard dash or 40-yard dash, regardless of whether you're a football player or a baseball player, I don't know what lacrosse gets tracked
right.
in.
We're about to say a golfer then. So they don't run at all.
Nope.
But still you could use the 40 as a method of you still talk about the static dynamic method. The rate of force is still important in the golf swing. You're still you're not exactly static at the top of the swing, but you're having to create a lot of force in a small vacuum of space by yourself. So to your point, you could still use the 40 as a method of seeing, is this squat method increasing that rate of force to the highest rate?
Yeah, because you're still trying to run a 40 in the shortest time possible. Mm-hmm. And so then there's your rate of force development. Now with golf, I don't know, squatting does not, a golf swing is more related to the bench press than it is squat.
Right.
And so if you got like a golfer that does not have to sprint or even like the swimmer, mm-hmm. I think squatting in general is good. If the sprinter needs to come off the block, depending on the sprint, like I said, box squat, he'd probably benefit or she would probably benefit with that. But being that they're not having to go for a specific time and we don't have the swimmer pool to pull from, I did have a swimmer, Ian, a couple of years ago, mm-hmm. And he box squatted, but his dad would come in and say, and he was a sprinter, how much better his times go. I don't have them written down. But with your reference for like James, he's been struggling with the box squat, and sometimes these people are more mental with it. It's which form of squatting are you going to regular squat? Are you going to box? What form of squat are you willing to do in order to get you to squat? Then once we get you squatting, whether it's a box squat, whether it's a regular squat, whether it's a front squat, as we get on down the road and as your strength increases with the regular, whatever your modality of squat, as long as you do that modality of squatting and you're not having to run that 40-yard dash, it don't matter as long as you're doing a modality that you feel comfortable doing so that you continue to do it. Because if you don't feel comfortable doing it, you're not going to do it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. We've mentioned a lot talking about lifting in the season. Obviously, it doesn't matter what sport you go across. I think a lot of strength coaches nowadays are not pushing it. They're just trying to stay healthy. But you've seen that not even do you have to stop working out in order for that sprint speed to slower, but you could just change the squat stimulus and the sprint speed. So we talked about in my baseball season last year trying to keep some of those strength gains. You talk about some of your football players who are even possibly getting faster. So how do you feel like if you're Alabama's strength coach today or you're the Atlanta Falcons strength coach today, how are you going to train your guys to, one, not get slower because speed's going to be so important, not get weaker, but also for people maybe at a more advanced level not get injured?
If, like we talked about Joey and you brought up the Falcons or Alabama or whatever, once you are at that level, they already have those kids. And most of my clients are the kids in high school trying to get to that level. Now, Duke really good, and he had some back issues, right?
Correct.
Mike Hinderman had back issues. I think when he was at Liberty, he had like 3 or 4 herniated discs.
Okay.
And then he came back to me to get trained for his pro day. I trained Mike on the belt squat because he absolutely refused to squat with a bar on his back after his injuries. And Duke was the same way. Did not want to put a bar on their back to squat. Just like now, Joey has no back issues, but does not want to push the squat.
Correct. And
what I have seen with Mike, Duke, and even Bryce now at the gym, I box squat them on the belt squat, and they still continue to improve their 40-yard dash by belt squatting with the box. And if you as an athlete during season, in order to keep, and it's less demanding,
right?
Because now you don't have that spinal pressure. So if you're a collision athlete like a football player, you don't have to worry about the fear of them not, at least they're box squatting. And you can still, the stimulus of the static dynamic, you're still sitting and you still have to maintain some type of off the box. And so they're still getting that static dynamic stimulus. It may not be what it has to be as a high school kid to improve, but at their level, it's enough to keep them from regressing. And it's enough to where it's not so strenuous to where it's not overtaxing the nervous system either.
So maybe cutting the weight down to, we talked about earlier, from the 85, maybe the 65%. I know some guys, instead of doing 4 sets of 5, 4 sets of 3, sometimes they're doing maybe 4 sets of 2, 4 sets of 1.
Yep.
Obviously, not everyone has access to a belt squat. So do you still think it's, and obviously some of the high school kids, I think it's largely dependent on what you're looking for. If you're a high school kid trying to get a scholarship, like maybe pushing that is more important compared to your upper level guys who the health is a little bit more important. So how you're pushing it is more so dependent maybe on the athlete and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and like what we was talking about the other day at the gym is knowing the person.
Yep.
If you know that kid's trying, the more you know of a kid and the more you know of the kid, you can back off more because the effort that they still give when you back off,
right,
they're still going to give high effort. Whereas a kid that does not try, if you back off, they're still not going to try
right,
with that lower load. And so it's almost better to ramp up the non-trying kids' load versus the high kids. So like my nephew Zach's able to box squat 455 for sets of 5.
Right.
But sometimes he'll come into the gym, which do 4 or 5 for 4 or 5 sets of 2. Or 425 for 1. It's still the stimulus of the getting off the box. He may not be squatting the loads, but at least we're minimizing the regression. And sometimes I've had kids like even like Johnny Muska back in the day. he never went above 225 on squat. And I had a kid named Hayden Cruz last year. He never went above barely went above 335, if at all above 335. And Johnny never went above 225, but Johnny squatted over 315 because of the level of effort that he was putting behind the 225. He was able to squat max 315 or more on the safety squat bar.
Right.
And so, like, Cruz never went above 335. I don't even know if he went above 315, but he still box squatted 425. And I think that it's due to the effort level that they were trying, because they were still both squatting with a tendo unit and trying to get some numbers. So when you're squatting with a tendo unit, you know those numbers are playing in your head because you're trying to, I did a 7, let's try to get that. It's almost like it becomes a game. And although the load's not the threshold sometimes like out of season, but in season, they're still getting gains. Like last year, I had a kid that regular squatted. He went up during season. His squat got better. He went from a 340 to a 385 squat during season, and then right out of season, his whole goal, I was trying to get him to squat 425. I'm at 405, and so by the time season was over, in his week or two out of season, he squatted 405 instead of not squatting at all, squatting at 340, and then you don't squat at all during season. Now you're at 315.
Right, exactly.
So now we're 90 pounds ahead, but we didn't have to be at that threshold.
I think we saw that with me last year too. I remember doing squat days at 300, 315 pounds. One day it was just like, I'm going to go up until the speed doesn't go. And we're doing 405 for set of 2, moving them both in that 0.5, 0.6 range. It's more important on the effort level you're putting in, that you don't have to necessarily kill yourself with heavy weights on the squats. You talk about the difference between the bench and the squat. The bench, you kind of got to suffer on a more regular basis. The squat, as long as the effort's right, the bar speed's right, you're still going to see and reap benefits from it.
Yeah, even if the bar speed's a little higher, it's the effort more with the squat. But I'll have some online. The online stuff is tough because at the gym I could say yes or no, but then online sometimes these kids have like their parents and things involved, and so everybody's always like, it's got to be heavy, and so I'll downgrade the squat to a lower weight,
right?
But then they'll write back that they did a higher weight, and I'm sitting there thinking that's not what I would do. You don't have to be against the wall all the time with a squat, and that's what I tried to get on that episode. When it's okay to miss your numbers. We don't miss a lot of numbers on squat. We do miss a lot of reps and stuff on the bench.
Right.
Just like I said, just like with the Johnny example and the Cruz example, I had another kid. They substantially squatted a lot more for the actual load that they were lifting when they were actually doing the routine. And so it's very hard to get that answer out there to people, because if they think, again, it's a think in the thought process, and the thinking is associated with feelings. They feel if they're not squatting that heavy load all the time, they're not going to get any better. Right. Well, it still comes down to, at the end of the day, you just got to trust the system. Right. I'm not trying, why would, I'm not going to screw my nephew over, and he's squatting 4, and sometimes he squats 385 for 2. Yeah. And when he's done 455 for 5. Yeah. But he's in season, just like I told earlier, like with these kids that are still getting better online, that's in season. But, I'm not also pushing and trying to knock down the door with it either. Right. Just trying to stimulate. Like Lee Haney, you say, stimulate, not annihilate. At certain times of the season, as long as we're stimulating that aspect, we're still getting that neural drive. The nervous system still has to fire to overcome that external resistance. And whether that external resistance may be the optimal external resistance, so like if you're coming in and you're beat up after practice, you got tired legs, you overdid something there, and 385 feels like 455, and you feel like you're dying with 3, your body's still interpreting it and still going to give optimal discharge frequency. It may not be at that optimal load that you once were, that you are used to handling. It's still that discharge frequency from the nervous system that's causing that neural adaptation that you're still able to maintain or actually improve upon because of the effort you're giving behind what you're doing. Right.
So to go off that missing reps argument you made, you go on in the same episode talking about you give someone just 4 sets of 5, and the guy goes 4, 3, 3, 2. at, I don't remember, I think you mentioned like 295 or something like that. Is that, I understand missing reps is okay, but I guess are all missed reps created equal? So say you gave him 295 and he goes 4.332 compared to you could have given him maybe 285 instead of, say he goes 5.543 or 5.554, however it may be. Is there a certain way to miss reps that you're looking for more? Like obviously you could push the weight way up and give him 4x5 and he's got no chance at it, or you could be closer to where it's like 4 sets of 5 goes 5.554, etc.
If I gave him 5 and they hit 1.5, I'm satisfied. Sometimes even when I was trying to push Dorsey, and I'd have him do like 4x5 and he goes all 4s, don't even get a 5. And like I told you, like with Cody and stuff, you kind of make a mess with it. Then you go a little higher, then you come back. So like if you're missing reps so let's go something easy, 225 on bench.
Okay.
If you're going 4.4444 and you come back in, sometimes the next day I may give you 4 sets 5, or I may give you 4 sets 5 again, or I may give you 5 sets 5 with the same weight, or I may give you 5 sets of. I've been doing this. I may give you that weight instead of 4x5. I may give it. Instead of 4x5, I might give it 5x4. And then I turn around and try to flip it to 4x5. So I just take the sets and reps and flip them and see what happens. And if they go 4.444 and they come in next time, they go 5.443, that's a perfect, especially for a bench.
Right.
But a lot of times people feel like then when they're missing reps, they're having a hard time with it. But then I know they got 1.5. So if it's 225 and they got 5.443, they didn't make all the reps. And the next time I can give them like maybe 225, 2 sets of 3, but increase the load 5% of 200, which is 10 pounds. Now we're doing 235 sets of 3. So if they go 3.3 or 3.333, that means they're able to handle that 225 for 5.
Right.
And so they went away with it. Now we come back to it because now they're used to that heavier load. And we come back to 225. We try to get 5. We'll probably get more 5s because we were able to get that heavier load. So usually that's where in those other episodes, that 5% rule, if I increase load by 5%, I should be able to get, and I got 5, increase it by 5%, I should be able to get 3s. Now I'm getting clean 3s, and I decrease it by 5%, and I'll go back down to the 225. I should get more 5 reps.
Right. But
with the science of practice strength training and with the super training, it talks about where you want to be.
Quick insert. So when guys are performing these reps, say they have 4 sets of 5 and they go 4.444 all the way. Obviously, the first set, he attempted a 5th rep, missed it. Do you want them to attempt a rep to failure every time? Or if they suffer up a 4th rep and you know without a doubt they're not getting a 5th, do you want them attempting that rep? Or just, since they already know it's not going to happen, just go ahead and rack the bar?
It depends on where we are in the set.
Okay.
If it's the last set or the second to last set, yes.
Okay.
I want that optimal discharge frequency. You know, it's kind of like if sometimes I tell people to think of a set of 5 as actually a set of 2. Because the first 3 reps kind of get in your way and they fatigue you for the 4th and for the 5th rep. And so if you've done sets of 5, the first 3 are fairly smooth. A 4 and 5 can be an absolute bitch.
Right.
I forgot who was benching the other day, but I had him do 4 sets of 5, and that last rep was the same speed every time. And I said it was Nolan. His kid's name was Nolan. His 5th rep was the same speed every set. I didn't think he was going to get it, but I said that's how you know you're resting at the optimal rest period for whatever you're resting, because you're not going 5, 4, 3, 3. Now sometimes if you do see that, it could be that they're not resting the optimal amount well either.
Right.
And so it's either the fact that they're actually fatiguing at that rate, or they're not resting at the right or the optimal rest break for that particular person. For me, when I rest about 6.5 minutes when I bench, And if I had to do that same thing where I get sets 5, I am barely squeaking out that 5th rep every set. And I'm resting long enough for that 6.5, sometimes 7 minutes to where I'm barely squeaking out that 5th rep on the 3rd and 4th set, so on. And that's where you'll see somebody, if they got 4x5 or 5x5, they may go 5, 5, 5, 5, and maybe 4 in the last set.
Right.
And that's absolutely perfect. And so sometimes it could just be a manipulation of the rest break. And so with them missing reps within that thing, with this brief maximum tension method is given priority in training, which is 85 to 95%, one example, 3 to 5 reps. And so the brief maximum tension develops the ability to concentrate neuromuscular effort and yields a larger training effect than the progressive resistance method. So the progressive resistance method is the sequential order of firing. You're slow, you're intermediate, and then you're fast. When you need, which increases strength without increasing muscle mass, which is important for sports with the brief maximum tension. Lifting maximum and near maximum weights enhances ability to accelerate heavy loads and increases special work capacity as expressed by skill to develop brief concentrated effort. And so when you are within that window, you're still, if you're not getting 5s, you're still getting 3s. So you're still, even if we go to 3s and you're getting 2s,
Right.
you're still demanding that central nervous system to fire at that optimal discharge frequency, which is giving the result.
Right.
And so many people associate making reps with the result.
Right.
It's what you're doing with the reps that's giving you the result. And what you're doing with the reps is you're demanding the central nervous system to fire at the optimal discharge frequency. Now, for the people that mentally, like when Emily missed her rep the other day at the gym, she sat there and demanded that nervous system to fire and at optimal discharge frequency. And if she demands that enough, then the adaptation will take place. But if it's never demanded out of the system, you're not going to get as great of an adaptation. And that's why when people are missing reps, it's good.
Yep.
Especially, I think a lot of people, I deal with young people, and I've dealt with myself, and even up to my mid-30s, I could fire at the optimal discharge frequency at a frequency of 3 days a week and have no ill effect. Now, for some reason, I break down, but my breakdowns now in my body have come from me skipping my accessories for years. And so now I try to, because I used to do what I call the minimum effective dosage. I could take my bench and I could increase my bench from 365 to 405 or 405 to 440 or whatever by benching and doing tricep press downs only.
Yeah.
And now, by me not doing my lat pull downs or me not doing any type of shoulder work, now my left shoulder's bound up to where my arm don't go over my head. But that's because I have skipped and made weak links in the chain along the way because of me skipping the accessories. And if the kids at the gym, it's okay for them to skip their accessories once a week. So if they just wanted to come in and bench and press down and leave, that's fine. That's the only 2 things, if you're actually pushing, that you need to increase your bench. But for someone that's at the gym that does not really want to try, they may have to bench, incline, tricep press downs, overhead tricep extensions,
Right.
do more of the load because they got to do more to make up for the effort level.
Right. Last question here from the How We Got Screwed Up Our Way of Thinking podcast. You go on talking about the different methods of training. You go on to talk about you can basically provide your max effort in terms of the weight, which is like we've been talking about, you're really pushing the weight, or like we talked about with the intensities, just by the intensities you're talking about pushing the speeds, and there are more than one ways to push that maximum effort.
Maximum effort, it can be termed in 2 different ways. Maximum effort could be maximum effort of trying or maximum effort of maximum load. And so if you have maximum intention, you need to have maximum intention with the dumbbell jumps to create the optimal thing there. But then you also have to maximum tension with the maximum effort method with the load on the bench press. So depending on, like when you're throwing a baseball, you're throwing a light object at the highest possible speed that you can attain, you have to have, that's giving maximum effort in that sense, as far as when you're giving maximum effort against a resistance of a heavy load. So you got two different ends of the strength spectrum. When you're doing your speed strength activities, which is around 20% or roughly 15 to 25%. And then you got maximum effort method, which is basically 85+%.
Right.
So if you draw like this, you're either here or over there.
Plus or minus 15%, the bottom or the top of the spectrum of the bell curve.
And so once you have to give maximum effort when it's light, and you got to give maximum effort when it's heavy. And if you give half-ass effort over here, you're not going to be at that percentage, because you by your lack of effort, you backed off the intended percentage of what you got to do.
Right.
So
I feel like squat, in terms of we talk about squat, doesn't always fall in that. It's not in that bottom 15% or that top 15% of that bell curve. It's probably more closer to the middle, but the effort is still matching it. How are they still taking the big gains when they're not in that very bottom or top?
When they're not here at the very bottom or the top, that's usually done within like the seasons when they're doing that. And I don't understand how sometimes they could be like a Muska where he was squatting 225, or like a Cruz where he was squatting 315 and still be able to max at 405. It's just now that kind of kid's kind of on the radar, versus this kid can't do that. And so by you just messing with him over time, you found out, okay, this kid can gain from this, but this kid over here cannot gain for that same thing that this kid's gaining from.
Right.
And so that's kind of why I don't like to remove myself from the gym, because I like to see these different things. And that's why you read the folders the other day. Why is this kid, everything's so highly individualized? That's why the more I kind of removed from that situation, the less I see. And so if I'm not in that situation, I may not be able to dial in per person like I do.
Right.
And so that's kind of the whole key of me knowing all the athletes is, oh, this kid can do this. But then I'd have a kid, I had to have a kid, we had to do a cluster where they did a rep, rested 30 seconds, did a rep, so we did a 5 like that. And some kid saw me use that method on another kid, and that kid wanted to do the cluster for himself, and he was wanting to do it because he thought it was an easier way to do it. So like I had, this was Cam years ago, he was not getting his sets of 5. He got it 5, then the last couple of sets or whatever, he was just making a mess of. So his last set of that set of 5 was like, Cam, we're going to cluster it. I forgot what the weight was using, but he would squat, stand up, racket, rest 30 seconds. Squat, racket, rest 30 seconds. Squat, racket, rest 30 seconds. And he's able to get 5 reps that way, but he was not able to complete 5 reps in a row with the bar continue to stay on his back. And so sometimes, in order for me to get the job done, depending on knowing that he tries so hard, and I could use a more advanced method like the cluster method in order to complete that setup. But I don't, and the kids at the gym right now have not ever probably even seen that pulled before, but that's kind of a card or tool I've got in my toolbox to where I'm trying to help this kid that's about to go to college. I'm not going to see him for several months.
Right.
We're trying to get the maximum out of him before he leaves so that I know I have sent the best product off to college. And then some other kid that has no need to do that advanced method wants to do the advanced method because he saw this other kid do it. So it's kind of like sometimes monkey see, monkey do.
Right, exactly.
But he also had to be pressed at that threshold. He was one that could not get it at a lighter load. And so over time, and if I went there, no one knows what the clusters are at the gym.
Right.
And so by me able to throw that card at that kid was able to get him to jump a 40-inch vertical at 240 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's all he ever wanted to do. So it's so hard. Like we've talked for almost 2 hours. It's so hard to get everything out because there's so much out there. And sometimes when we're talking, I would have never even thought to bring this cluster up until you asked that question. And the more questions someone can throw at me, there's so many damn rabbit holes that we can go down to figure out when's the right way to utilize this. But a lot of times, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, it's all science. Challenge what you've read, and you got to. Now you've read book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. This kid applies to book 2. This kid may be in book 5, and learn how to fluctuate. That's why the gym operates not as a group anymore. It's all a bunch of individuals, to where I have to try to consult in order to make sure that we're giving them the right thing. And sometimes they'll keep doing things, and I'll see something and I'll ask them a question, or they'll get more advanced, or they're long enough for me to actually, like me and you have conversations now. Instead of you just come and do a routine, we kind of more methodically talk about it, how we're going to attack it, what the game plan is. We go this for a certain amount, we go for this a certain amount, and knowing how you've adapted through the years kind of is going to tell you, like during season, you could back off and still get gains. But like for like Brooks back in the day, he didn't want to back off, although he needed to back off, and I would have to tell him no versus him always wanting to do yes.
Right.
And so and again, it just boils down to trying to know the people that are there. And sometimes you may get a kid that's there a year or 2 years, and that's still not enough time to fully understand and learn someone, because they change so much as they continue to change. They may have started off at book 1, but now they're ending up to be book 4 in the long run.
Right.
But you had to get them through certain levels of training in order to expose those qualities or those flaws.
Right.
So, is that all the notes you had, questions you had?
That's all I had. 2 hours worth. That's all I got.
Sorry, folks. I didn't mean to go on for 2 hours, but I know some people like these things shorter. So, Daniel, where can people find you at?
Instagram, Twitter is the same. Daniel Blair 085. I follow Jared. We post a lot of his stuff. So,
yeah. So, thank y'all for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on and asking these questions. So, hopefully, if y'all have questions, feel free to reach out to me, or you can reach out to Daniel. Me, info@explosivemechanics.com, or my Instagrams, Explosive Mechanics, or Twitter @ExplosiveMEC. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And again, thanks, Daniel, for coming on and having this conversation.
Of course.